6 everyday staples are slipping away from grocery aisles, and none of them are fancy or expensive. Some have nearly doubled in cost within a handful of years. Some rely entirely on a single strip of farmland located oceans away. Some have been around for 3 millennia yet are getting harder to locate in their authentic state. And some cost pocket change but are always the very first items to vanish the moment people begin quietly stocking up. This is not speculation or internet gossip. It is the outcome of fractured supply lines, volatile weather patterns, and shifting buyer habits silently reshaping the tidy shelves we walk past every week. What separates a casual shopper from a strategic one is timing. Experienced food stockpilers never wait until the shelf is bare. They make their move while everything still looks calm, plentiful, and perfectly ordinary. Once you grasp the genuine forces pressing on these 6 foods, there is a strong possibility that the next time you step inside a supermarket, you will scan those orderly aisles with an entirely new perspective. Let us begin the countdown now. 6. Concentrated tomato paste in a can. 95%. That is the staggering figure that transforms a tiny tin of tomato concentrate from a boring pantry afterthought into a strategic asset. Roughly 95% of processed tomatoes consumed in America originate from a single patch of earth, California's Central Valley. Think about that for a moment. The entire nation effectively leans on one narrow geographic corridor for its pizza sauce, marinara, ketchup base, and those little red cans sitting quietly on the bottom shelf. During stable times, nobody blinks. You stroll through Walmart, Kroger, or a local discount grocer, spot a neat row of small cans priced around $1 each, and mentally file them under permanently available. But that serene assumption is precisely how silent erosions of supply take root. Not with a dramatic, empty shelf, but with subtle thinning. A trusted label vanishes. The bargain option sells out first. The generic store version no longer appears reliably. It is there one weekend, and by the next trip, only a couple of dented stragglers remain shoved in the corner. The initial stressor traces right back to that singular growing zone. Processing tomatoes are not the delicate heirlooms you cradle at a farmer's market. They are a high-volume crop that must be mechanically harvested at peak ripeness and rushed to cooking facilities immediately. When California buckles under sustained drought, irrigation cutbacks, or soaring water fees, the entire industrial engine groans. Farmers make razor-thin calculations. Is tending tomatoes worth the investment, or can another commodity generate a better return per acre? When planted acreage shrinks, raw tonnage plummets. When factories lack raw material, they must ration their output. Executives face an uncomfortable triage. A tiny can of paste is a low-margin, high-volume filler item. As operational expenses spike, corporations naturally prioritize premium lines, bulk food service contracts, or products with healthier profit cushions. Those modest little cans that most shoppers ignore become some of the earliest casualties of reduced production schedules. No press releases, no recall notices. Shipments simply trickle in slower, pallets become smaller, and the shelf presence fades a little more each month. The second burden comes from the metal jacket itself. People fixate on the food and overlook the packaging embedded in the final sticker price. Steel, aluminum, transport fuel, factory electricity, and manual labor all escalate the cost of sealing food inside a container. Premium products can usually swallow those incremental increases. But $1 can of tomato paste? Even a marginal bump of a few pennies in tin plate costs decimates an already slender margin. Cheap staples frequently vanish first, not because nobody wants them, but because they are too economically awkward to prioritize when everything gets expensive simultaneously. The third factor sits inside the mind of the shopper. As household budgets tighten, customers actively hunt for low-cost multipliers. Tomato paste sits squarely in that sweet spot. One compact can stretch us across 4, 5, or even 6 separate meals, depending on how creatively you cook. If that can cost roughly £1, the per-portion flavor investment is basically pocket change. Hardly any ingredient can fundamentally alter the soul of an entire stock pot for such a negligible sum. A casual consumer spots a humble can. A preparedness-minded individual sees a pot of hearty chili bulked with stored beans, a root vegetable stew with richer color, a quick pasta dish that no longer tastes like poverty, a savory tomato rice that folks actually want to eat, or a ladle of canned meat and potatoes suddenly transformed into a respectable supper. That is the quiet superpower. It turns survival rations back into recognizable meals. Your deep pantry likely holds grains, legumes, and canned proteins. Those items keep a belly full, but after several days, the enemy is no longer emptiness. The enemy is monotony. Rice keeps tasting like rice. Beans keep tasting like beans. Palate exhaustion creeps in, especially among older adults who naturally eat less when tired, anxious, or navigating a prolonged power outage. Just one spoonful of tomato paste can resurrect an entire pot. It brings vivid color, a gentle acidic brightness, savory depth, and the psychological comfort of a dish that was deliberately cooked, not just rehydrated. In a tough stretch, morale rarely hinges on luxury ingredients. It hinges on the quiet feeling that says, this meal actually tastes good. Nutritionally, the concentrate punches above its weight. Because the water is removed, the resulting paste packs significantly more lycopene per spoonful than the equivalent weight of raw tomatoes. Lycopene is a powerful antioxidant extensively studied for cardiovascular support and cellular protection against oxidative stress. The paste also delivers useful amounts of vitamin A, vitamin C, and potassium, micronutrients that become precious when a diet shifts heavily toward beige starches. Shelf longevity is another silent advantage. Most properly canned tomato paste holds strong for 18 to 24 months, and many tins endure well beyond that if stored correctly and kept free of dents along the seams. Stash them somewhere cool, dim, and dry, away from a hot stove or a sweltering garage. When picking cans, reject any that bulge, leak, show rust, or carry deep creases near the rim. Saving $1 is never worth gambling on food safety. And here is a small but transformative habit. Never store leftover paste in the opened metal can. Scrape it into a clean glass or food-grade plastic container. Snap a lid on tightly and refrigerate. If you only ever use a tablespoon at a time, portion the remainder into an ice cube tray and freeze it into individual flavor bombs. Next time you heat a pot of soup or sauce, simply drop a frozen cube straight in. Zero waste, no frantic can opening, and no forgotten half-used tin growing mold behind the pickles. Tomato paste is not charismatic. It does not generate excitement the way coffee, honey, or canned fish might. But that lack of glamour is precisely why it gets overlooked until the sticker price jumps or a favorite brand disappears without ceremony. If a cheap little can already faces strain from drought, packaging overhead, and cash-strapped consumers, then our next entry is even more eye-opening. It lives in virtually every kitchen. It holds tens of thousands of calories inside a single large jug. And when its price climbs, nearly every cooked dish in the house absorbs the sting. If you were forced to pick just one ingredient to make simple survival meals taste edible, would you reach for tomato paste or concentrated broth? Share your pick in the comments. 5. Cooking oil. The most affordable source of dietary energy in the kitchen is quietly getting pricey. Not long ago, a 1-gallon jug of plain vegetable oil sat comfortably around $6 across most American supermarkets. Today, that identical jug routinely scans between $12 and $14, nearly a doubling. What is more instructive, however, is that the biggest jugs are frequently the first format to disappear whenever supply tightens or a flash discount hits the app. 1 gallon of cooking oil stores roughly 30,000 calories. At a price of about $13, you are paying less than 1/2 of 1 cent per calorie. Almost no other pantry staple matches that brutal efficiency when measuring pure energy density. The first headwind blows in from global commodity markets. Ukraine was historically one of the planet's biggest exporters of sunflower oil. As the devastating conflict grinds on, production and shipping corridors have been battered, forcing bulk buyers around the world to pivot furiously toward soybean oil, palm oil, and alternative feedstocks. When too many industrial bidders stampede into the same replacement pools, prices inevitably surge upward. The second culprit is climate volatility. Scorching heat waves, erratic monsoons, and stubborn El Niño conditions can suppress palm oil output in major Southeast Asian producer nations. Palm oil is not merely frying medium. It lurks inside an astonishing array of processed snacks, baked goods, and spreads. When yields stumble, the resulting squeeze cascades violently through the whole edible oil complex. The third factor is the brute cost of logistics. Seeds must be harvested, trucked to crushing plants, mechanically pressed, chemically refined, bottled in plastic, and then shunted through a continent-spanning cold chain of distribution centers before finally resting under fluorescent grocery lights. A random shopper sees a plastic bottle of golden liquid. A preparedness thinker sees hundreds of future meals and a low-cost energy bridge whose affordability may not hold. Rice, beans, pasta, and oats deliver bulk, but they contribute almost zero dietary fat. Just one modest tablespoon of oil contributes roughly 120 calories and transforms a meal from merely filling to genuinely sustaining. When diesel spikes or shipping rates inflate, every one of those charges eventually lands square on the shopper's receipt. If you could toss only one item into your cart today, would it be a large jug of cooking oil or a big sack of rice? Over recent years, water temperatures across traditional fishing grounds have shifted measurably. The fish have not necessarily vanished from existence. They have relocated, migrating toward colder currents or farther offshore in pursuit of their own thermal comfort. Consequently, fishing boats must voyage farther, extend their trips, and guzzle more marine diesel. The humble can of fish in your hand does not enclose merely protein and oil. It encapsulates fuel surcharges, cold storage electricity, stevedoring labor, long-haul trucking, and hundreds of cumulative hours of maritime toil. When all those input costs spike in unison, the final checkout price is mathematically incapable of staying flat. The third factor originates with consumers themselves. A growing demographic of people now recognizes canned fish as a near-perfect pantry anchor. It is dense in protein, conveniently portable, edible straight from the tin, and requires zero cooking. Solo dwellers, seniors, coastal families bracing for hurricane season, and busy individuals craving a fast, nutritious lunch are all converging on the same product category. When demand climbs aggressively but wild fisheries cannot scale up quickly due to biological limits, market pressure becomes unavoidable. If a household formerly bought 4 tins per week for roughly $8, today that same basket might cost $14 to $18. Spread that delta across a month and the grocery ledger swells by several extra bills. Over a full year, the gap can compound into hundreds of dollars from canned fish alone. That is the reason preparedness-oriented shoppers do not accumulate tins out of panic. They accumulate them for brute nutritional value. One small can routinely delivers 20 to 25 grams of high-quality complete protein, alongside meaningful doses of omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, vitamin B12, and absorbable calcium when you eat the softened, edible bones. Few shelf-stable foods rival that micronutrient density in such a tiny package. There is a curious paradox here. A pantry may be loaded with sacks of rice, pasta, lentils, and canned green beans, yet still remain completely barren of natural omega-3 sources. You may possess abundant calories. You may feel physically full, Yet your cellular machinery can still be starved of the specialized fats that sustain cardiovascular integrity, cognitive sharpness, and systemic inflammation control. A regular consumer sees a can of fish. A preparedness-minded individual sees a fully finished, no-cook meal that deploys instantly. No grid power, no stove, no clean water, no prep time. That specific utility is nearly impossible to replicate during a blackout or when exhaustion leaves you unwilling to cook. Tactically, a tin can be flaked over crackers, piled onto hot rice, tossed into a salad, stuffed into a sandwich, or folded into quick pasta. In just minutes, you have a protein-rich plate without expending extra butane, propane, or electricity. Most canned sardines and mackerel deliver a shelf life of 3 to 5 years, assuming the can stays intact and is stored in a temperate, dry environment. Always reject tins that bulge, bleed rust, or bear deep creases along the rim seals. Here's a quick field tip that savvy purchasers learn early. Do not fixate on the visual size of the tin first. Read the nutrition panel. A compact can packing over 20 grams of protein can sometimes offer superior dollar per gram value compared to a larger can swimming primarily in sauce. It is also intelligent to alternate between sardines and mackerel to diversify your fatty acid and mineral intake. I am genuinely curious about your preference. If you were constrained to stock only one type of canned fish in your deep pantry, would you commit to sardines, mackerel, or classic tuna? Tell me in the comments. 3. Instant coffee. Every jar depends on weather patterns straddling 2 separate continents. A jar of instant coffee used to ring up around $7 or $8 at most chain grocers. Today, numerous familiar labels have climbed to $10 or $12, and even higher for a jumbo jar or a heritage brand name. It sounds like only a few extra bucks, but if a household works through 2 jars monthly, that differential compounds to nearly $70 annually. And the most telling signal is once again not the posted number. It is the shelf geometry. The biggest jars typically clear out first. Private label store brands evaporate. The decaffeinated SKUs become frustratingly scarce. Sometimes the coffee aisle still appears superficially stuffed, but a sharper look discloses that only the smaller, pricier per ounce sizes or ultra-premium blends you never planned to buy remain available. The root cause originates in Brazil, the nation that supplies roughly 1 out of every 3 coffee beans consumed globally. When Brazil suffers a punishing drought, an unseasonable frost, or an underwhelming harvest year, the global commodities market flinches nearly instantly. Diminished output squeezes warehouse inventories. When commercial stockpiles run thin, roasters lose their flexibility to wait for favorable pricing. They must scramble for raw beans early, bid aggressively, and ink contracts at elevated rates. That is the moment the domino cascade begins. Farmers harvest less, buffer stocks dwindle, roasters absorb higher costs, distributors pile on logistics fees, and eventually the shopper stares at a familiar jar that costs several dollars more. The second pressure valve resides in Vietnam, the world's dominant producer of Robusta coffee. This is a detail many casual drinkers miss. Robusta is not merely filler for cheap tins. It is an absolutely critical component in instant coffee manufacture because of its intense caffeine punch, bold flavor profile, and excellent solubility during mass extraction. When Vietnam's central highlands endure drought, delayed monsoon rains, or diminished yields, instant coffee manufacturers everywhere feel the tremor directly. Put bluntly, a peaceful morning in America can hinge on weather conditions in Southeast Asia. When Robusta supply chains constrict, instant coffee factories must compete fiercely against roasted whole bean brands, bottled beverage conglomerates, and giant import syndicates, all chasing the same shriveled pool of beans. If they cannot lock in enough raw material, they simply cannot manufacture enough jars to fulfill supermarket inventory demands. That is why shoppers rarely witness a completely bare aisle. Instead, they encounter a far quieter form of shortage. The family-sized jar is absent. The familiar morning blend is gone, and only a few costly niche options remain. A typical jar of instant coffee yields roughly 60 to 100 cups, depending on its net weight and the drinker's preferred strength. If the sticker jumps by $3, the per-cup hit is barely a few cents. But for someone who depends on that ritual daily, those pennies aggregate into real money. That is the reason many preparedness-oriented buyers do not procrastinate waiting for further hikes. They secure an extra jar or two while the current price still feels sane, effectively purchasing tomorrow's mornings at today's tariff. Coffee delivers negligible calories. It is not a protein source, but it preserves ritual, and ritual anchors the human spirit. For many older adults, the day does not officially commence until a hot mug sits beside them. It might be the moment they scan the news, swallow their morning medication, phone their children or grandchildren, or simply sit in stillness for a few minutes before confronting the calendar. During periods of upheaval, small, predictable ceremonies like this help tether people emotionally. A cup of coffee will not magically deflate a rising grocery invoice, but it can make the kitchen feel stable and familiar. And sometimes, the restoration of a tiny slice of normalcy is precisely what the mind craves most. Storage hygiene matters here too. Keep instant coffee sealed in a cool, dim, dry environment far from the stove's humidity and direct sunlight. Never leave the lid off for extended periods. Ambient moisture causes clumping and premature aroma loss. If you purchase extra, favor factory-sealed jars or airtight vacuum bags, and consider decanting a large bulk purchase into smaller portions for long-term use. Do you personally keep a backup stash of coffee, tea, or cocoa in your pantry? Let me know in the comments. If a single spoonful of instant coffee must traverse 2 continents before dissolving in your cup, then the final items are even more remarkable. One almost never spoils, yet it faces mounting pressure from the collapse of millions of bee colonies around the planet. The other costs practically nothing, but forgetting to buy it could render your entire food storage profoundly joyless. 2. Pure honey. A 3,000-year-old food that is becoming increasingly difficult to acquire in its genuine form. 3 millennia. That is not the estimated age of a crumbling monument. That is the verified age of honey jars unearthed by archaeologists from ancient Egyptian tombs. What stunned the researchers was the fact that the honey had not spoiled the way nearly every other foodstuff decays. Honey possesses remarkably low moisture content, natural acidity, and an environment hostile to bacterial proliferation. That is why honey has been regarded across civilizations as one of the most valuable foods to store long-term. But here lies the modern paradox. Today, the challenge is not spotting a squeezy bear of honey on a shelf. The challenge is locating genuinely pure honey in larger sizes at a price that still feels rational. If you pay close attention in major supermarkets, the little 12-ounce bottles still sit there. The handsome golden cylinders with artisanal labels often appear fully stocked, but the 5-pound bulk containers typically vanish before most people even register their absence. The rationale is straightforward. The unit cost per ounce is dramatically better with the big jug. If a small bottle only lasts a couple of weeks of tea, a 5-pound container can sustain months of usage. Morning oatmeal, toast, yogurt parfaits, lemonade, glazes, sauces, or as a direct sugar substitute in baking. For people who incorporate honey daily, the gap between buying tiny bottles and large bulk containers is no longer pocket change. It compounds into genuine household savings month after month. But price tells only half the narrative. The remaining half is trust. What increasingly frustrates consumers is not merely that honey has gotten costlier, it is that they find themselves silently interrogating the bottle. Is this substance inside actually pure honey? When true honey supplies come under sustained pressure, the market becomes dangerously permeable to blended or adulterated products. Some bottles appear gorgeous, crystal clear, and premium grade. They taste sweet, certainly. They glow with that iconic amber color. But inside, they may be stretched with rice syrup, corn syrup, glucose syrup, or other cheap industrial sweeteners. To the average shopper squinting at a label in a busy aisle, It is almost impossible to discern the difference by appearance alone. That is precisely why veteran beekeepers share a small piece of wisdom worth repeating. Do not just buy the bottle of honey. Buy the beekeeper behind it. Amateurs fixate on the color. Experienced buyers interrogate the source. They flip the container around before even glancing at the price. They check the country of harvest, the specific apiary name, the production lot code, the bottling date, and the ingredient declaration. If the list states exactly one ingredient, honey or 100% pure honey, that is usually a far better signal. Labels reading honey blend, honey syrup, or listings that include corn syrup, glucose syrup, fructose syrup, or rice syrup deserve suspicion. Also, they harbor a healthy suspicion toward honey that looks too flawlessly pristine. Real honey is not required to be crystal clear like a shampoo advertisement. Depending on the floral source, it may be lighter or darker, carry a milder or more robust aroma, and be thinner or more viscous. Color alone proves absolutely nothing about purity. Provenance is the primary thing deserving your scrutiny. Do not fear crystallization. Many people wrongly assume it has spoiled when honey becomes thick or forms a solid mass. In truth, crystallization is an entirely natural, inherent characteristic of genuine honey. The glucose naturally precipitates out into crystals over time, especially when stored at cool ambient temperatures. Many beekeepers regard a fine, uniform crystallization as a positive indicator. It demonstrates the honey has retained its natural characteristics and has not been excessively heated or ultra-filtered. If your honey crystallizes, simply place the sealed jar in a bowl of warm water around 104 degrees Fahrenheit and stir gently. It will gradually reliquefy. Never nuke it in a microwave or boil it directly on the stove. Excessive heat degrades the delicate aromatic compounds and living enzymes. Store honey in a dry spot with a stable, moderate temperature out of direct sunlight, and always tighten the lid securely. Never refrigerate honey. Chilling only accelerates the crystallization process. A small decorative bottle may provide sweetness for a short stretch, but a 5-pound bulk container of verified pure honey can yield hundreds of servings over many months or even years. That is why experienced food preparedness shoppers often secure it before prices climb higher. I would love to hear your buying habit on this. When selecting honey, do you look at the price first, the brand label first, or the source first? Tell me in the comments. 1. Iodized salt claims the #1 spot because it is dirt cheap, stores practically forever, is deployed every single day, and has virtually zero true substitutes in the kitchen. A standard 26-ounce cylindrical container of plain iodized salt costs only about $2 or $3. Yet that single container can season hundreds of individual meals. When you do the arithmetic, the per-use cost is a fraction of 1 cent. In the entire supermarket, very few products cost so absurdly little while touching so many dishes. The vulnerability lies precisely in its cheapness. Salt is so inexpensive that most people do not allocate a single brain cell to it when building a pantry. They might buy extra canned meat, pasta, rice, coffee, or honey, but they forget one stark reality. Without salt, virtually every stored food becomes a chore to consume. Rice without salt will physically fill your stomach. Beans without salt will still pump protein into your muscles. Soup without salt will still hydrate your tissues. But after a few days, they all converge on the same crushing problem. They become flat, tedious, and psychologically exhausting to eat. That is the moment appetite fatigue transforms stored calories into uneaten calories. That is why veteran preparedness planners do not classify salt as a secondary afterthought seasoning. They classify it as the absolute bedrock of an edible pantry. Salt enables cooking. Salt enables preservation. Salt enables lacto-fermentation and pickling. Salt allows you to pre-season stored components. Salt makes simple survival meals pleasurable enough to finish. A pinch of salt can resurrect a bland soup, make boiled root vegetables appealing, give a pot of morning oatmeal more character, and help a humble plate of rice feel like a deliberate meal. The key detail is selecting the correct type. For routine daily consumption, iodized salt is generally the superior choice over plain salt. Iodine is an essential micronutrient for thyroid function, and for households that do not regularly eat seafood, kelp, or dairy, iodized salt remains a simple, economical, and familiar vehicle for it. However, if you intend to use salt for pickling cucumbers, fermenting cabbage, or curing meats, read the recipe carefully. Some preservation methods explicitly demand salt that does not contain anti-caking agents or iodine, as these additives can cause cloudiness or off flavors. A common rookie mistake is buying one type of salt and assuming it universally works for every application. Storing salt is not complex, but moisture is the mortal enemy. Do not keep salt next to the stovetop, near the dishwasher, or anywhere subjected to steam. Salt is aggressively hygroscopic. It absorbs atmospheric moisture rapidly, turning a free-flowing pore into a solid rock-like clump that is infuriating to use. Salt does not spoil the way milk or cooking oil spoils, but improper storage can render it deeply inconvenient at exactly the moment you need it most. One of the smoothest strategies is to buy multiple medium-sized or small-sealed containers rather than cracking open one giant bulk bag and using it for a decade. Unopened containers stay cleaner, drier, and are simpler to rotate logically. If you do buy in bulk, partition it into airtight containers and consider adding a food-safe desiccant packet or a few grains of dry rice to help control clumping. With iodized salt, regular turnover is wise. The salt crystals themselves remain geologically stable essentially indefinitely, but the iodine content can gradually degrade if exposed to prolonged light, moisture, or elevated temperatures. Always use the oldest container first and replace it with a fresh one. It is the simplest discipline. What makes salt exceptional is not its rarity. It is its absolute essentiality. During a sudden stock-up rush, the items that vanish fastest are rarely the lobster tails or the premium steaks. They are the familiar, inexpensive, daily driver products that nobody consciously debates buying. No one stands paralyzed in the middle of a grocery aisle deliberating whether to purchase salt. They reflexively grab an extra container, and the next shopper arriving 10 minutes later discovers a shelf just a bit barer than it was before. If you could retain only one seasoning in your entire pantry, would you select salt, black pepper, or sugar? Let me know in the comments. Salt may never be the most attention-grabbing item, but in a deep, well-structured pantry, it is precisely the item you will kick yourself for forgetting to buy ahead of time. The foods that disappear the fastest are rarely the most expensive or the most glamorous. More often, they are the familiar, affordable staples woven quietly into everyday meals. And by the time the broader public collectively realizes their true value, the shelf no longer looks the way it used to. Preparedness is not about living in constant fear or stuffing your home with an unmanageable mountain of food. Preparedness is about deeply understanding what genuinely matters and acquiring it while you still have abundant choices, while the right products are still sitting on the peg, and while the price still makes rational sense. A well-built pantry may not ultimately be measured by a raw count of cans or sacks of grain you own.